Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural StickyTrades CryptX webinar. I am Monte. I'll be joined by my co-host CJ Reichel, and today we're going to be talking about all things crypto. Looking forward to getting to know the audience. If you guys have any questions, I already see some coming in. Please feel free to share those questions in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to hit all the tickers that you guys want. There's a lot to cover today. We only have an hour, so I think without further ado, we are just about ready to dive into things. CJ, how are you doing, my friend?
Pretty interesting day in the markets. I'm really excited to talk about. Q's down 350 basis points nearly. So quite a day, quite a sell-off in Bitcoin and Ethereum. So excited to get into the charts and discuss, different tools that we think might be helpful to the audience and just a lot of great analysis overall. So with that being said, anything to say before I jump into Bitcoin and the overall broad analysis?
Yeah, just one thing. This is going to be the start of the new CryptX service here at Sticky Trades. So CJ and I are going to be sharing our insights. We're going to be doing weekly videos, writing articles, and also we have an extensive education curriculum that's available for you to try. Right now, we have one course live in the curriculum, and I'll quickly share that before we dive into the charts. But there are many more to come. So we're starting you off with the basics. What is cryptocurrency? Designed for new investors, traders, and anyone curious about digital finance. It breaks down complex ideas like blockchain, wallets, and DeFi in clear, practical lessons. So we're going to be providing weekly webinars, trade insights, educational content, articles, and a whole lot more. So thank you. And I see we have a lot of returning people that recognize us. I appreciate that very much. But CJ, if you'd like to get started with your Bitcoin analysis, I know you've got some thoughts, so please feel free to go ahead and share.
Yeah, for sure. And it's always great to see, familiar names in the chat. We're very grateful to be part of Sticky Trades family, and we hope to, this for to be a great beginning to a long and fruitful relationship. But before diving into Bitcoin, I want to talk about kind of a broader overview of the S&P 500 and one observation that I had last week. So this is the 20-week moving average that we have on the S&P 500. And I was wondering, even in the most bullish of market conditions, per year we have on average at least 2 to 3 retests of that 20-week moving average. Even in 2019, 2020, and 2021, some of the most bullish years in recent memory, we had 1, 2, 3 retests of the 20-week moving average. Now, in 2025, we have only had really one significant drop, which was the tariff sell-off earlier in April. And we're long overdue to have, I'm not saying a market crash, but kind of a 3 to 5% correction in the S&P 500 here. Just something to kind of go down and retest that 20-period moving average. So I don't know if the sell-off is necessarily over in the S&P just yet, but what I'm looking for is a retest of that 20-period moving average on the weekly chart. With that in mind, let's move over to Bitcoin and talk about some of the daily price action we've been seeing. Yeah, so seeing a little bit of a bearish Harami at the top of that uptrend. So not the, I was hoping for a little bit more follow through, from the bullish perspective last week, considering we had the highest weekly close in Bitcoin's history, which was pretty cool. But today, not so much from the bullish perspective. I saw one individual say in the chat earlier, cha-ching for the bears or the shorts. I could not agree more with you there, brother. Absolutely. But last week when we had our midweek webinar, we were on with AJ and Nod, and we talked about this being a favorable long setup because we saw the CCI bottoming. We saw the similar thing with the Stoke, divergence from the 20-day moving average, and then some bullish candles beginning to stabilize price. So if we're going by the 6 or 7 point trading checklist, I say 6 point because there's no gaps in crypto. So, good enough. That was a nice favorable long setup. And typically what I'll do when trading in the futures market is I'll look to put my stop loss a little bit below that previous low, and risk about 1% when it comes to the levered futures. And we got kind of the inverse earlier in the week when we saw the CCI really turning over again and giving us that pivot downward. So at that point, if I'm going purely based on the trading checklist, which is what I consider criteria to enter a good trade, there was nothing really to do, right? If anything, there was an indication of trimming risk earlier in the week, but right now we are back to neutral. We are testing, previous resistance as well as the 20-day moving average. We'll see if that holds as support. But ultimately, in terms of opening new trades, nothing to do really in the short term. So that's what I have in terms of the basics of the technicals on Bitcoin. We can go into ETH, but Monte, anything you'd like to add to that, or any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about Bitcoin just briefly because I'm seeing a lot of the same things you're seeing, but I have a trade set up here that I'm going to put on if the conditions are met, and it has a lot to do with what you talked about, the stochastics really turning down, dipping below the moving averages now on this move down. A lot of this news is kind of fundamentally driven. I think the increased talks with more tariffs in China has driven price down. But what I'm looking to see is a retest of this level here at about 108.3. So we've seen this level act as resistance in the past. And AJ always talks about how when you see resistance here, it flips to support here. And we saw that there and there as well. So I wouldn't mind buying in if we do come down and retest these levels with an upside target of the previous swing high at about 124.4. So I think there is opportunity here. It's not immediate. Looking at the stochastics, I am imagining that we see a move back down here, and that's what I'm prepping for. So basically this level, this critical level here of support that was formerly resistance, you can see it's always been resistance even back here, but just as much as it served as resistance, it also served as support during moves to the downside as well. So if we get a move down here, what I expect to see with the RSI and the CCI is a move below into oversold territory. And if we see oversold territory like we have here and like we have here, those tend to be followed by relatively strong rallies. So looking at Bitcoin right now, I don't think there's a whole lot of action to be taken unless you want to play this to the downside and try and then flip long once we get down to this current level. But in the meantime, I'm just kind of waiting for this level to get hit. I'm going to enter the trade, keep the stop loss tight right below the swing lows just in case we get any breakdowns. But I think the risk reward here is actually looking pretty good. And this is all contingent on the stochastics, of course. But in the meantime, I like what I'm seeing from Bitcoin. I think we're in for some interim bearish price action. But in the medium to long term, I actually like Bitcoin. And this is something that Nod shared with me today. CJ, I know you're a big fan of the Livermore accumulation pattern, but some traders have been talking about this on Bitcoin and how we're kind of reaching that point in this chart here. We're kind of coming from the 7 point, heading towards the 8 point. So, this would
Going
have
to
a price.
500, going to 500,000 per coin in a year? Is that what that is?
That's the
Wow.
price target for the Livermore accumulation cycle. And we've seen this play out in many assets before. Whenever you see those strong levels of accumulation, there's been strong interest. There's been strong futures interest as well. Lots of open interest on Bitcoin contracts. So I think that we could see that. And further, it seems like every day, if you read Not Live, there's another institution getting involved with crypto. And I think that's hugely important for price action. The more on ramps, the better. The more legitimate investment vehicles, the better. And I think that we're starting to see a lot of that. So it's kind of reminiscent of 2020 or even maybe 2017. But I do think that we could see some very positive price action after we retest those lows here.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. We'll be watching for the setup, and if it comes and we get it, then could be an interesting trade. Man,
Yeah.
500K in the midterm election year. That's we'll see about that.
Yeah.
You want to jump to ETH? I'll go through ETH real quick. I also want to talk about the altcoin season index a little bit because I think that's a great tool to ultimately look for times to de-risk from the altcoin market. I know a lot of you guys were likely trading the Ether ETFs, maybe some options around those. So I'd like to cover that. And then I see we also have some other comments in terms of tickers. Please get them in the chat and we'll cover as many as we can. So yeah, want me to hop over to Ether?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. That is quite the red candle.
Yeah.
Very similar setup in Bitcoin. I mean, we talked about this last week in terms of the really getting that hinge up in the CCI. But what I want to talk about is something known as the altcoin season index. You may have heard this term altcoin season on social media, but the way that we define it is an altcoin season is a period where the top 20 cryptocurrencies are outperforming Bitcoin over a 90-day look-back period. And when the majority of those cryptocurrencies are outperforming Bitcoin over a 90-day look-back period, we see the index get overextended above 75. And many times throughout the years, when we see the index, I mean, it's the same premise as the CCI. Once we see the index turning down from overbought levels, we're looking to get out of, maybe not get out of altcoins, but severely rotate from altcoins back to Bitcoin, because what we typically see is a very strong drop in performance of altcoins relative to Bitcoin once we come down from those overextended levels. And as you can see, historically, it happens very rapidly, which is what we're seeing right now. So if we were watching this last week, that would have been a great indication to really rotate or de-risk when it comes to Ethereum. And what we've seen ever since, when we look back to the Ethereum Bitcoin chart, is really severe underperformance ever since late August. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And like I said, this is the altcoin season index. There are many iterations of it. I'm sure you can find the indicator on TradingView, but this one that I like to use and have used for many years is on blockchaincenter.net. So just another tool that you guys can add to your arsenal to look for, really risk off and risk on conditions. Last thing I'll say about the index is that when I'm looking to expect some outperformance from Ethereum relative to Bitcoin, I'm looking for the index to be in a oversold level below 25. And on average, we see that remain oversold for about a period of 3 to 6 months. So just if we get overextended to the downside, I'm not immediately hopping into ETH, but once that 3 to 6 month period of consolidation kind of forms and we see, some ascending from that, that's where I'm looking to take longs in ETH, but not really anything super actionable right now. When looking
Yeah,
at
and
the charts, what's up? Yeah.
I was just going to say it kind of makes sense that we're entering Bitcoin season a little bit here, and ETH's been underperforming. We tend to see Bitcoin lead the charge, right? So when Bitcoin's price elevates, we see Bitcoin go up, the altcoins kind of stagnate. Then once we get into that kind of overbought area or oversold area, we start to see the altcoins really rally. So I think we need to see Bitcoin break into new highs and show some serious strength. And that's when you get all the altcoins really starting to overperform.
Yeah, and usually some stupid things will happen in terms of
Yeah,
stupid price action. I remember the last time we were up at this level, that was when Trump launched his meme coin, and then
right.
the market died temporarily. Solana went from like, I don't know, 250 back to like 100. Anyways, something to pay attention here too, and yeah, I'll pass it back.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I, for the most part, share your sentiments. I do want to just um, touch on a little bit shorter term outlook for ETH. We are at a critical level here. This 4K level is a critical level for ETH. We've seen it act as, once again, same sort of thing with Bitcoin, an area at which you can actually go all the way back here, and you can see that that area of resistance has flipped to support. Get this line straight. So that's the line I'm looking for. If we see a breakdown below this level, I expect the shorts to start piling in here, and see a move down perhaps to this previous swing low of around 33.58. But what I've highlighted here is the stochastics, particularly the RSI and the CCI. And look at these areas where we've reached oversold territory and then the subsequent price action. So we had this negative divergence trend down in the oscillator, and then we bottomed out here, and we almost touched the 30 point on the RSI. From there, we saw a nice increase in price, and then we got up to about 4,700, and then we saw some consolidation. And once again, we're seeing the same sort of thing where you have this negative divergence in the RSI, and it leads to sort of this false bottom here. We got one. We did see a nice little bounce from that price action, but now it's headed back down to those levels. So if you're looking for a short-term trade, perhaps wait till you see the RSI and the CCI. It's the same area here where you see these oversold levels get bought back up and a rally ensue. I think you could see the same thing happen in ETH. So if we get down into this oversold territory and you see maybe some support at this level, like right here, that might be a good place to enter a long, wait for a bounce off that level, wait for the CCI to bottom out, and go long there. That's my kind of short-term outlook. But in terms of performance relative to BTC, one thing I always like to look at is Bitcoin dominance, which is just the total percent of the crypto market cap that is comprised of Bitcoin at any given time. And this chart looks bullish. This chart looks bullish. We bottomed out here. Stochastics are looking strong. And this typically means when we get up into this 60% to 70% level, that's when we see Bitcoin outperforming the altcoins. So that doesn't mean the altcoins won't go up in price. It just means that Bitcoin is going to go up uh, a bit more than what we see with the altcoins. And then once you start to see it turn down and you start to see weakness, like we saw here with this breakdown below the moving average in the RSI, that would have been a great indication to perhaps start sprinkling some money into altcoins. And then once you get massively oversold like this, it's a good time to get out. So Bitcoin dominance, really important chart to watch. And I think that going forward, we're going to see some Bitcoin overperformance like CJ predicted. But that doesn't mean the altcoins aren't going to rally, CJ. And I see we have some questions in the chat. Do you want to start knocking out some of the tickers we got in the chat?
Yeah, of course. Do you want to have a general discussion about XRP very quickly?
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
know there's some interest in that, and I know Ripple's come a long way. We were talking about this earlier today in terms of the tokenization of assets going on to XRP or BlackRock ultimately looking to tokenize assets going into the future. I don't know if they're experimenting with Ripple's technology particularly, but one thing that I can say is that Ripple has significantly upped their game in terms of institutional acquisitions, and they've gotten just so much billions of dollars from the appreciation of XRP over the years. But last May, they acquired Hidden Road, which is a institutional brokerage firm, one of the most respected in the field, for about $1.25 billion. So now they do have legitimate assets, and they have built their credibility. And we've seen that reflected in price action ever since Trump kind of wanted to give a break to American cryptocurrencies. I think the rumor was that he said no tax, no capital gains tax on American cryptocurrencies. Probably won't happen, but it really resulted in some crazy price action in those. I don't know I don't know what to make in terms of Ripple and the continuation of tokenization of assets on that platform. Are you generally bullish, or what are your thoughts there?
So in the meantime, I'm bearish. I do think their acquisitions have been significantly impacting their price action, but I think going forward, what is going to drive price most is kind of what we were talking about and just the general flow of capital within the crypto ecosphere. So I think we need to see Bitcoin really rally first for XRP to make any sort of significant move. You can see it's sort of been stuck in this descending triangle here, and it looks like it could plausibly be in this descending triangle for another couple of weeks before it breaks to the downside. That being said, if it does enter into oversold territory, and it comes back down to retest the $2 level, I would definitely be a buyer at that level, or at least a short-term speculator. And I would look for a move back up into the highs. But I think when you're taking a look at basically any altcoin, you need to take a look at the Bitcoin Dominance Index. You need to compare how XRP is performing relative to BTC. If it's, and you can do that just by going XRP, BTC,
Yeah, this
and
is
you
a
can,
very important, sorry to interrupt. This is a very important aspect of if you're going to hold altcoins, always
right.
looking at the BTC pair, very critical.
Yeah, and we are getting a little bit of a doji candle here on the bottom of this downtrend, but I'm not convinced fully that this is something that's ready to turn around just quite yet. I think Bitcoin needs to reach new highs, and we need to see significant inflows into the crypto ecosphere in order for this one to really pump. Just based on the XRP BTC chart, I'm not too optimistic in the near future. But once we do see a turnaround of the Bitcoin dominance of the price relative to BTC, I think that that could be a great short-term play, just getting long XRP. Like you said, their acquisitions have been good, and I think that they've been adding value in the background. So, short term, I'm slightly bearish, but if we go down and retest that $2 level, I would be looking to go long there.
It's a very interesting conversation we could have with a lot of these layer ones and the idea of tokenizing assets on top of them and then how that ultimately creates some type of value accrual mechanism. But I am a bit skeptical when it comes to a couple of those.
Sure.
But that's a whole another conversation. Let's what else do we got in the chat in terms of tickers? I think we had Sol mentioned.
Yeah.
Very similar spot. When you're looking at the altcoin index, things like Sol, XRP, ETH, they're all in a very similar boat, right? Because we're expecting, or typically what we see is that underperformance of altcoins relative to Bitcoin, and that's usually paired with just general risk-off sentiment. So I'll be looking for when those levels ultimately go below 25 on the index. But until then, kind of just got to wait it out. And I'm looking generally flat, not really doing anything until we get a trade set up. But any
Yeah.
thoughts? Any thoughts on Sol?
Yeah, no, I think you can apply everything we just said to Sol as well. I do think that'll be one of the better performers during the bull market. And once we're in that altcoin season, I think that Sol will perform very well. But in the meantime, I'm not necessarily leaping into action at this point just because we're seeing Bitcoin showing strength into the alts. And I think that means your money's better served in Bitcoin right now. And that kind of leads into another question we have from Gino, CJ. He says, please ask about your portfolio in terms of what percentage you do Bitcoin, ETH, altcoins. Any insight you can share into kind of how you are managing your portfolio?
First of all, Gino, it's great to hear from you. Remember you from back in the day. Also, I've become more of a Bitcoin maximalist over the years, or actually looking more towards crypto stocks as opposed to the altcoin market. I know, Monte, you sent me a big list earlier in the day. We should definitely hit some of those.
Yeah,
But I've
definitely.
just been looking to accumulate Bitcoin. Personally, my view is, I like altcoins for trading opportunities, but in terms from, an investing perspective, I'm really just looking at Bitcoin. Also, like crypto companies, I think are, stuff with like legitimate flows into the industry, I think are always interesting. Personally, my view, and this is like years out macro, so it's not the end all be all, but I think because 2026 is a midterm election year, it kind of lines up with 2022 as well as 2018, where we see kind of neutral to bearish price action in Bitcoin. However, what Bitcoin's really proven to us this cycle is that it can be an excellent hedge to the liquidity trade, which is the expansion of global M2. We've seen a very strong correlation with Bitcoin going up as well as M2 expanding. So this includes assets like gold, the S&P 500, obviously silver. I don't got to tell you guys that. And Bitcoin. And now we have legitimate institutional ETFs as well. So we have a new Federal Reserve chairman that's going to be appointed when Powell's term ends in May of 2026. I have no doubt in my mind that Trump is going to pick somebody who's super dovish and will ultimately look for growth and is going to juice the markets, not only with liquidity, but potentially lower interest rates. And that could send gold and Bitcoin much higher. I think potentially to $800,000 or $900,000 per coin, looking more towards 2028. But we got to get through the midterm election year first, what I think could be a little bit choppy. But going back to my initial point about, or the initial question about what's, the portfolio breakdown, if I can get into Bitcoin at, sub 100 or even 100,000, and then we're looking at a potential 8x over a thesis that has already worked and is showing that it's continuing to work, I don't really want to mess that trade up necessarily with, trying to beat it by buying altcoins. I'd rather just buy a lot of Bitcoin and watch it continue this, global M2 liquidity trade. But Do you have any different thoughts in terms of, having ETH in a portfolio or maybe some other altcoins as opposed to BTC?
Yeah, for me, I look at it as it's as simple as Bitcoin and ETH are investments for me. I will occasionally trade them, but for the most part, I just accumulate. And then the altcoins is where I do most of my trading because they have high beta and there's lots of opportunity there. So I tend to trade altcoins and just invest in Bitcoin and ETH. I'd say my portfolio is about 75% Bitcoin, 20% ETH, and then 5% some other coins. And that actually leads to another question I see in the chat, CJ. We've been talking about underperforming altcoins, but there are some that in the last week have
Yeah.
been they've had some rocket fuel injected into them. One of them being Zcash. We were talking a little bit about it before we went live here, but I would just love to get your thoughts on Zcash and maybe why it's pumping and where you think it could go from here.
I'll be honest, I don't understand the price action entirely, but the privacy narrative, Naval Ravikant was tweeting about privacy. Coinbase has been posting a lot about privacy. So we're seeing Zcash, one of the original coins from 2017, actually perform really well and go parabolic. I don't know who is long this stuff, to be honest with you. But I mean, if we're going from a trading perspective, yeah, thank you for bringing up the chart. It
Yeah.
doesn't fulfill the criteria for the 7 point trading checklist, so I can't really chase it up here. I mean, what a move, going from about $30 all the way up to 230 in little under a couple weeks. So maybe we get an actual potential short trade with some mean reversion, but I just, there's not really a lot that I can do at this point. I feel like I've missed out on the opportunity of Zcash. But do you have any thoughts on privacy and what we're seeing in that current narrative play out? Because obviously it's been very powerful. Do you think it has staying power across the space?
I've always wondered kind of why the privacy coins underperform relative to some of the other altcoins. We've seen it with Zcash, we've seen it with Monero, XMR, but now they're starting to get their time in the sun. And I think that, you know, when you think about what crypto was supposed to be and what Bitcoin was initially supposed to be, it's this anonymous form of money that people can use or accumulate. And I think when you're talking about privacy and you're talking about coins that you can actually, spend and like when you talk about Monero and you're talking about Zcash, Z Zcash uses zero knowledge proofs. So you can essentially send money to anyone without anyone knowing what address it came from. So there is utility there. And, obviously that can be used for nefarious purposes. That could be what's going on here. But I think that more than anything, people are growing to appreciate the privacy that's inherent with these tokens. And it's very hard for the government to identify your wealth if it's stored in these private tokens. So I think people are migrating to things like Zcash. We haven't seen that much of a move yet in XMR, but I think that chart is also worth taking a look at. Um, yeah, so this one I'm a little bit more bullish on in the short term. We got a nice um, trend kind of forming here, and we have clear resistance at this level. Sorry. So the way I would trade this is I would wait for a breakout above this level here. If we break out of there, I think we could see a move similar to Zcash. So right around 352.50, break above that level, I think would be very, very bullish, and we could see at least a swing up to the previous high, which is all the way up here at around 421. So in the midterm, I see this thing moving upwards. Maybe wait till it comes back down and touches this uh, bottom trend line before it starts to climb higher. But overall, it seems like privacy coins are kind of the one asset I would recommend trading as opposed to Bitcoin because they seem to be outperforming in the short term.
Yeah, usually Zcash is one, it feels like one of the last rotations of, the risk on period of the market that we're seeing, but
Yeah.
we'll see. It's going to be interesting to watch. Unfortunately, can't really trade it in terms of the checklist, but all right, we have a question. What's the best altcoin to trade for someone who is just getting into trading in this space? I would say really just liquid stuff, the majors, because I think there's a big disconnect from what's been happening in terms of retail crypto trading versus institutional crypto trading. There's actually a explosion of adoption in terms of institutional crypto trading that we're seeing in not like small assets, but like the top 20, because there's a lot more institutions, especially here in Chicago, that I've seen that are really giving access for institutions to be able to trade like perpetual futures. I'm saying trading though, not necessarily investing. So I would say the top 20, maybe XRP, Solana, obviously Ethereum, and I would use that, or I do use that altcoin index kind of as a guide when we see some really underperformance by the alts over a 3 to 6 month period. Then that's when I usually like to get involved. But right now it looks like based on those metrics, we are sort of overvalued in comparison to Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think if you're looking to start out, I think you start with ETH and Solana. I think that just looking at those pairs and talking about CJ's altcoin season chart, if you're looking at those two assets during altcoin season, you see Bitcoin starting to stagnate a bit. That's typically a sign that capital is flowing into the altcoins. So I think ETH and Solana are a great place to start for trading your altcoins, just because it's very easy to they're high market cap, they're liquid like CJ said, and also it's really easy to compare them to Bitcoin to see how they're performing and if you can get that higher beta relative to Bitcoin.
Yeah, and something that we are going to teach and go over is the way Monte and I trade a lot of crypto is through decentralized perpetual futures. These are things where you don't really need a whole lot of leverage in terms of the alts. I don't usually go above 5 or 10x. I use them, the liquidation price is my stop loss. But with Bitcoin, in those futures, sometimes there are situations where I'll use 15 to even 20x and just use the liquidation price as my stop loss. But with that in mind, yeah, because it's, if you're trading on Coinbase or Robinhood, like the spreads and the fees really kind of suck. They're unfavorable for short-term trading. I guess they're fine if you're looking to invest in this stuff, but personally, I've found that using like a lot of the decentralized perpetual futures exchanges is how I do it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
And there's
How
some
about
really good ones too. Binance Labs just dropped Aster a couple weeks ago, which is a pretty cool exchange. They're taking a lot of volume away from Hyperliquid, which had been the other primary one. I
yeah.
interrupted you though.
I was just going to get to one of the questions we have in the Q&A, and that is regarding BITI. I was wondering what you saw there. Right now, trading around 1795. There's a slight gap to the upside. What are your thoughts on BITI and how it may perform relative to Bitcoin or just in general over the next couple of weeks here?
Okay, so this is just the short Bitcoin ETF. I actually have not traded this vehicle before, but I think I've traded the levered one, UBIT, I believe.
Yeah.
I mixed the ticker symbols up because there's so many different ETFs now. But yeah, I mean, look, very bullish candle today. But in terms of me entering into a new long trade, I'm going to sound pretty redundant, but I'm going to go back to the 6 point or 7 point trading checklist. And if, the criterion is not being met, then it's a bad trade to me. And sure, there are bad trades that make money, but I want to be taking good trades repeatedly. And what I define as a good trade is just something that hits every single one of the checkpoints. But back to your original question, what I would do if I was riding this is that, I'd like to do technical analysis on the actual asset because obviously the ETF is a little bit different. So, just kind of reiterating with Bitcoin, this was a nice signal in terms of selling. Volume didn't really help you too much, but we have a turn down and a pivot lower in the CCI. Stoke also is or was losing momentum up there. So if I had the luxury to get short up there, which I didn't, I was just flat, I would still hold that short, and I would be looking for a retest of the 20-week moving average in the S&P 500. I would use that more of as like a broader backdrop to the risk on versus risk off trade. And I would look for a retest of this level down here. And ultimately, I would be looking to take my profit in a Bitcoin short once we start to see the pivot up from the oversold part of the CCI. I don't think a lot of this is news to you guys. Like I said, this is probably very redundant as it's following a lot of AJ's analysis, but this is how we do it, and this is what maintains our discipline and keeps our process solid, consistent, and repeatable so that we can generate consistent and hopefully linear returns over time. So if you have anything else to say about that, I'd love to hear it, but that's generally my technical overview of Bitcoin and what I would do personally if I was short that thing. It's tough to jump in now, especially when we're selling off right into support. But if you got into it early, nice, because you probably did pretty well for yourself today.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some other assets in the crypto equity space that have been performing very well. You briefly mentioned them earlier, but I just want to share this with the chat. This is from this week. IREN is up 4% at $66 after a 6% rise on Thursday. Now up more than 520% year to date. Wolf is 5% higher in pre-market after a 10% surge on Thursday, bringing its year-to-date gain to 150%. Other notable movers include Cipher Mining, CIFR, CleanSpark, CLSK, and Bitfarms BITF, which all trade 2 to 4% higher in pre-market. So everyone talks about BITO, BITI. Everyone talks about Riot, Mara, even MicroStrategy. But there are some lesser known equities out there that have been performing very well and providing opportunities to a lot of traders out there. So some of these lesser known names gaining a lot of traction. And I love to see it because for the longest time, it feels like mining has been dominated by Riot and Mara. But now that we're seeing more competition pop up, I think that's really good for both Bitcoin and the price of some of these stocks. So we might see a pullback in Riot and Mara due to competition. I think that would be a good buying opportunity. But overall, I think the momentum with some of these smaller tickers is definitely worth looking at. So those are just 4 names that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention because I do think that those can continue to perform very well as they have year to date.
My friends told me to buy IREN when it was like, I think $5 or at least a year ago, and I never bought it. And it went up like 500% for them. But you know what? Missing trades is part of the whole experience, and you got to get used to it over time. But I don't need to tell you guys that. Any veteran trader knows. Following up on that idea of the crypto equities, Monty, I got a big list of them. So let's just go through them real quick. Rough day for MicroStrategy. Nothing really set up there yet. Going to continue to let the falling knife just fall. Bitcoin miners ETF. So this is one that was clearly overextended. And I'm going to hit all of these rapid fire very quickly. But the thing that you guys will notice if we look at our just, candle body cheat sheet is you're going to see a lot of bearish engulfing candles. You're probably going to see a lot of hanging mans and shooting stars when I go through all of these charts. And they're all pretty widely diverged from their 20-day moving average, which is just not an entry setup for me. It's actually quite bearish. So with that in mind, let's just go through a couple of these. Clearly bearish engulfing at the top of an uptrend.
And look at that volume as well.
Yeah, good call. Just being overextended, generally speaking. You had just mentioned Riot, very similar type of deal. So we're going to see if this trend ultimately holds up because I have to say it's looking a little vulnerable here. Coin did a nice job of filling that gap up at about 380 before coming back down. Still looking like it's working on a couple of those gap fills lower below the market. But just generally speaking, not a lot of setups I can get into. There's the classic iron.
Yeah, look at that chart.
Not a lot of altcoins looking like that these days. I gotta say, it's all about the crypto equities in terms of the crypto market, or at least it has been recently until Zcash pumped this week. TerraWolf was interesting. I actually saw this in Duquesne Capital's F13 back. That's Stanley Druckenmiller's fund back in, I think, a year or two ago. So he was a holder of this one. It's done very well since, obviously. But just another bearish candle at the top of an uptrend, which for me is not really a good sign. We also had our first close below the 20-day moving average in the S&P today, and many major indices, which I know AJ always likes to talk about the Jim Rohrbach method of above the 20-day, generally bullish, below, generally bearish, with the exception of when we get those wide divergences. CleanSpark, this is one I traded earlier in the bull market. Interesting mining company. They've got some cool stuff going on. They did go through a lot of share dilution earlier in April, and that's kind of when we had this sell-off and underperformance, relatively speaking. But a lot of overperformance, and I hope some of you guys caught this to the long side because it's quite a trade over the last couple weeks. Let us know if you have been trading CLSK at all.
Yeah, real quick, CJ, I just want to say about CLSK, I had a trade set up for that. Like you had mentioned, wide divergence from the moving average. AJ always preaches the importance of how there's that sort of elasticity effect or that magnet effect where, and you can see it just a few weeks ago, where price gets too widely diverged from the moving average, pulls back, gets close to the moving average, and then continues higher. So I think we could see something very similar here. If we do get a pullback and it touches that moving average, I'm going to be looking to go long there because so far we're in a clear uptrend, a nice uptick in volume in the last month. And I think that this one is something that can continue to grow higher as it's still a relatively small market cap for a crypto mining company. So if we do get that pullback, which I do think we will, I think you're going to have a good buying opportunity at that moving average.
Yeah, we'll see. That's really the key of maintaining this entire uptrend, because if we start to lose that level and the 20-day starts to turn over and act as resistance, obviously that's a pretty big red flag for the bulls. Another thing that you guys might notice looking at the chart, we have a bearish divergence. We have price making a higher high, but we have the CCI actually making a lower high, meaning the momentum of the trend is declining. So something to keep in mind there with CLSK. Same deal with Mara, just less momentum on this second leg that we've seen in the last week. I wish there were more buy setups. Everything's just a little bearish neutral today, painting with a very broad brush. Yeah, this one's been beat down. Here's an interesting conversation that we should have, because the Circle IPO was such a monumental event for the crypto space earlier in the year. I mean, it was one of the most exciting IPOs. It was really mispriced by the bankers because usually IPOs just, decline, and this one actually went up like 2 or 3x. But do you think Circle is an interesting play in terms of its long-term viability? I really like the company, but one of my biggest concerns about it is seeing the market becoming saturated in terms of stablecoins as JP Morgan, as Bank of America create their own. What do you think about Circle's growth potential and the stablecoin market as a whole?
Yeah, I think Circle, like you said, just has too much competition. I think that the stablecoin market's getting pretty diluted. Even companies like PayPal have their own stablecoin that offers you 5% interest a month. So it's like, do you really need to go through Circle to buy a stablecoin? Will people really be using USDC to the same extent that they have been in previous bull markets? I don't know. I'm skeptical. Obviously Tether and Circle have kind of been the two main forms of stablecoins in previous bull markets. But like you had mentioned, we're seeing a lot more competition pop up. And I think with that competition, we're going to see a decrease in market share for companies like Tether and like Circle. And as a result, we'll see a drop in price. So long term, it's hard for me to be bullish on Circle just because of the overwhelming number of stable coins that have entered the space in just the last year, and I anticipate even more, even possibly a government-backed stablecoin being introduced. That would absolutely kill Circle. So for me, it's tough to touch that one from a long-term perspective.
Yeah, that's a fair analysis. I'm not giving up on it. I'm not throwing in the towel on Circle just yet, but I think the other component that is a little bearish for them is the declining potential cut in interest rates. Obviously, when they're parking a lot of their capital in rates, I think
Yeah.
Tether made like just insane amounts of money based on interest rate owning treasuries alone. This is a great question that I see from Hank that I actually kind of wanted to touch on, and I'm glad somebody brought it up. So, from a technical perspective, what indicators do you watch to identify when we're transitioning from a post-halving bull phase into a bear market? And historically, how many months after a halving does the price typically top out before the cycle turns? Typical downturn percentage, or do these things even matter as swing traders? So I think it's important in that perspective to separate trading and investing. Clearly, when we're trading, we're looking at things like the technicals. But in terms of the broader Bitcoin market, bull market, the post-halving thing, what do you think about that, Monty? Do you think we're nearing a macro top in Bitcoin around maybe 180K at the end of the year? Or, do you see this extending out 2 or 3 years in the future? And what things do you typically like to look at in terms of like longer term macro cycles?
Yeah. So one thing that immediately comes to mind is the stock to flow ratio, which is essentially just a measure of Bitcoin's supply versus current demand. And right now, it's lining up to look like we could hit 180 by end of year. I think that when you're looking at Bitcoin from a long-term perspective, it's just very important to keep an eye on the outstanding supply, look at on-chain metrics, see if whales are accumulating. If there's accounts that have more than $1 million worth of crypto and you see an uptick in those accounts, which is something you can see on Glassnode, I think that would be a good sign for long-term Bitcoin investment. But in the meantime, I think we just need to let the market do its thing. I think Bitcoin's going to lead the charge up to 180K. From there, we're going to see a pullback and a lot of rotation of capital into altcoins. So that's kind of the way I see it right now and the way I see the rest of this year playing out. So some positive price action for Bitcoin, followed by a rotation of capital into the alts.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. I was kind of hoping for a little bit of a pullback in the October timeframe. Obviously, October has been a very volatile month historically,
Yes.
but November usually pretty good for Bitcoin. It's always the people talk about, oh, you're talking about how much Bitcoin gains you have around the Thanksgiving table. Maybe that happens this year. I don't know. Maybe not if this week keeps, if we keep following the price action we've seen this week.
Yeah. We got some tickers to hit. You want to hit Gemini, Gemi? Um,
Yeah,
would
for
love to
sure.
know your thoughts on that. There's not much data, but it is something that's worth.
This is it. They just
Yeah,
IPO'd, right?
yes, they did. So not a whole lot to go off of yet, but I would just curious to hear your thoughts on it so far and kind of if there's any opportunity here that you see.
Yeah, so this is the Winklevoss's company, I believe, if you guys have not ever used that exchange. Gemini, I'm a little biased too, because I would always sign up for every account to just test the product. And there was a data breach in Gemini, and they leaked my data to the dark web. So now I get these bizarre phone calls saying your Coinbase account has been hacked, and it's like I haven't had capital in there in 6 months. It can't be. Nothing really to talk about in my opinion in terms of Gemini. I don't see it being, I mean, it's never really been the leading crypto exchange, especially with ETFs that we have now on NASDAQ. And, imagine if we see Solana ETFs or XRP ETFs. That could hurt the profitability of some of these exchanges because you can just buy them on Robinhood or Thinkorswim or, more traditional retail platform as opposed to a sole crypto exchange. So I was never a huge fan of Gemini. Perhaps their IPO does really well, but I am not involved in this one at all personally. Monty, any thoughts on Gemini?
Um, I'm not invested in it right now either. Like you said, they're a big exchange. They're reputable. They have had issues in the past. That being said, it's hard to find a reputable exchange to invest in these days. It's like you have not as many options as there have been in previous market cycles. You have basically Coinbase, Gemini, Kraken, really your only options. So I think in the long term, I think you'll still see growth as the crypto sector grows. You'll see Gemini grow along with it because it's been around for a while. It's a US based company, and I think that it's not going anywhere. That being said, with the chart being the way it is right now, I just can't bring myself to buy it. I think that it has potential for more downside before we start to see a real uptick in price. I think if Bitcoin makes new highs, it might be a good call to look at perhaps some out of the money call options on this one because Bitcoin breaking into new highs would mean, in my mind, some very positive price action for Gemini. So that's the way I see it right now. Obviously, you got this big bearish engulfing candle, low bearish volume. I wouldn't touch this thing right now. Give it some time, let Bitcoin make a new all-time high, and then circle back and take another look at this stock.
Yeah, let's come back when we get some more data.
Yeah,
Haven't
yeah.
really printed anything significant yet. I see Sui as well in terms of
Yes.
requests. Strangely enough, I know Raoul Pal was really like chilling this earlier in the
Yeah,
bull
he was.
market. Hey man, they give you a nice allocation. I mean, it's the least you can do, right? Uh, anyways, yeah, I mean this looks bearish in my opinion. I mean we are at support, but judging by the sell, I mean, look at this thing. I mean, I can't even look at how fast we're dropping in terms of the market. So yeah, it's hard to really enter any longs and buy this dip, and just general weakness and seeing a lot of heavy price action, and Sui is not really any exception to that. But we'll definitely come back to it in terms of whether or not it gets a setup because it's been what they like to call a football for the cryptocurrency markets. It likes to get kicked up and down a lot. That's.
Yeah.
Anything else in the
Yeah,
chat?
let me just cover Sui real quick and give my thoughts on it because I this is something that I was watching earlier in the week and I've been kind of waiting for this setup to play out. And it's looking pretty good so far, but there's a couple ways you can play this, right? So you have this clear descending triangle formation forming here, and at about $3.15, you have a breakdown level. If price breaks down below this level, I don't mind the idea of entering a short because there's not a whole lot of support to the downside. I mean, obviously it wicked a little bit below this level here, but as you can see, if it breaks down below this level, I think we could see a retest of the lows all the way down here to below $2.50. So watch for a breakout of this descending triangle. I think you could see some continued negative price action and a pretty decent opportunity to go short on that asset. So. But yeah, we only have a few minutes left. Let's knock out some more tickers. Next up, we got Deep, DEEP. Would love to hear
I
your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've not heard of this one. So is it the deep value ETF or are we looking at, oh, okay.
All these charts look so similar, man.
Yeah, wow, nice pump earlier. Let us know what that pump resulted from because I'm not totally familiar with this asset. There's so many coins. That's the other thing about this cycle compared to previous cycles and why I'm generally
Yeah.
more bearish on altcoins. There's just too many coins and the liquidity is being fragmented and there's just too many rotations. But yeah, not looking super bullish by any stretch of the imagination. So, we're testing support. We're basically neutral in terms of the oscillators. So In terms of trading, this is not the setup in which I do business with, but I think you're probably in the same boat as me on that one, Monty.
Yeah, absolutely.
Azora, I saw as well. We could hit.
Yeah, I can pull that up real quick. Zora
I
is one that.
actually,
Oh, you got it up?
I
Okay,
actually, can you
perfect.
see it? You
Yeah, yeah. This is one that I was gonna say is going against the grain of the rest of the crypto market. We have hit some intraday resistance all the way up there at around 13 cents. The way I would play this one is wait. I think we see a reversion to the moving average, but this is the start of what you want to see for positive price action. A break above the moving average. The moving average is turning up, and you can see after a long period of consolidation, we're finally getting some positive price action. Nice bullish volume as well. So, what I would probably do is I would wait for a break above today's intraday high or a pullback to that moving average and enter along. I think those are two valid ways to trade this because if it does break above that previous swing high that it was hitting back in like late August, I think that this thing could continue to run. So it's been a great 2 days for Zora. I saw the amount of volume that this thing had on the perpetual futures was pretty crazy, closing in on like $200 million worth of futures trading on this asset. So I think that this one could plausibly break out. But yeah, maybe either wait for a retest of that moving average or a clean break above that 15 cent level.
One thing I will do, yeah, I definitely hear you, Monty. I think you're spot on with that. One thing that I will do that AJ doesn't always do is on crypto particularly, I think you can take the principles of that seven point trading checklist and look. I like looking at the 4 hour chart sometimes as well to get a more micro time frame before making decisions based on the daily chart. Also, if there's not a lot of data on the chart, sometimes that helps in terms of changing from the daily to the 4 hour. But with that wrapping up, is there anything else you'd like to talk about, Monty? If not, I would love to talk a little bit about an idea and kind of a thesis I've been thinking of that doesn't involve crypto, but involves the theme of innovation and future tech that we really want to focus on in the CryptX product for you guys. But I know we're a little short on time, so
No, there's a few questions. Um, are there bearish crypto instruments to trade when it looks like the sector is rolling over? Where do you typically short your assets, CJ?
well, I'm a perpetual futures trader. However, there will be some times where, let's say I have capital in like Robinhood or just, I guess, like more or less serious accounts, just like smaller things that I like to look at if there's like very unique opportunities. I don't know them all off the top of my head, but I know there's very legitimate ETFs from ProShares. I know there are from iShares. There's short Ethereum. Just type in Google or ChatGPT, and it'll give you a great list of inverse levered ETFs, inverse 1x ETFs, or just long ETFs. Like I know BlackRock has a nice suite of products, and typically those are the ones I trade because they're the most liquid.
Yeah, we covered BITI earlier in the episode, but that's one that I really like to trade. Strong liquidity around it. The options tend to be relatively affordable. So BITI would be the instrument that I like to use, but there are, like CJ said, there are plenty of instruments out there. Another question, real quick. Your monthly chart last week showing crypto's best month is October is incredible. Is crypto behaving as you'd expect in the first 10 days of October?
I would say yes, because I'm not necessarily going. Obviously, that's October's been a very favorable month historically, but I think it's important to have that context. I can't remember a time in my entire trading career where we had in the S&P a bullish August, a bullish September, and a bullish October. One of those months usually messes it up temporarily, and I think that's what we're seeing the start of today, and that includes crypto.
Yeah, yeah. October has been a good month, but what it always has been is a very volatile month. So you can't guarantee bullish price action, but in October, you can almost guarantee there's going to be lots of volatility, which means opportunity. So, again, check out that BITI chart if you think that Bitcoin's going to head back down. And then, CJ, we have one final ticker to hit before we close off, BMNR for Bill.
Oh yeah, that's the digital asset treasury company that Tom Lee has really been talking about.
Yeah,
I saw it,
BitMine.
yeah, I saw it just, there's no real setup for me. I'm not really an investor in that company. I think long-term DATs might be a little bit sketchy anytime you're accumulating very like 70 vol assets for the long term. Your stock price is going to be pretty volatile as well. I saw that one break its 20-day moving average today, so nothing super bullish right now in terms of the technicals of that company. And I am a little bit skeptical in terms of the longer term fundamentals as well, as I am with companies with MicroStrategy and companies just trying to buy as much crypto as possible, because it hasn't always worked out in very risk off periods.
Yeah. One thing that's worth noting, and this is what I'll end off on, is that they do have earnings coming up at the end of the month. Last time they beat earnings pretty significantly, and we saw a nice increase in price, um, to say the least. So if we do have a positive earnings report, you could expect to see this one perhaps move up to the swing high or even break the swing high. But this earnings report, uh, it could be negative and we could see a reversion and some of these gaps fill. I think that's probably more of the likely scenario is filling some of these gaps to the downside. So, um, I wouldn't mind shorting this one right now. It's got a nice bearish engulfing candle. Overall, doesn't look too strong. But yeah, those are my thoughts on um, that asset. So, but that will do it for our hour, CJ. Anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
Yeah, I had a thesis about one innovative sector that I think is very interesting and worth going over, but we're going to have to save that for another time. So if you want to see that and more other analysis that we're going to have on CryptX, make sure you guys check it out. We'd obviously love to have you, and we're really looking forward to teaching our method of trading and investing in the cryptoverse, as well as other sectors, including new tech and innovation, because I think there's a lot to be excited about over the next 2 to 3 year period in the stock market as well as the crypto market. So I'm really grateful. This has been an awesome time to be back on the webinar with you guys, and I'll leave it with you, Monty.
Thanks, CJ. Yeah, I just want to echo your sentiment. It's been a wonderful hour with you guys. Thank you so much for all the questions. It makes the time fly by. I hope you found something informative out of here. And like CJ said, this is just the beginning. We're going to be bringing all of our insights over to Sticky Trades in the CryptX room. So don't forget to sign up for your 15-day free trial. We're sure after 15 days of our insights and our articles that you'll want to stick around. So definitely check it out. But that is all we got for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you again soon. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.